let's move towards sort of not closing down, projecting forward. Olivier, what's next for you? Where does you found a nice way of recycling batteries, Second Life, you're sharing it with the rest of the industry. Are you kind of now done? Are you going to put your feet up and say, hey, I've done my part for the world, and I owe the world nothing more? What's next for you in terms of innovation within this sector?
Yes, I will. I'm finished with everything now. Now, I have a big vision, and it will be. I want to the process to make it better, to automatize the second process, to get a battery grade for reusing the material. I would like to try a universal cutting machine for different kind of cell type, and to expand maybe also in Europe, to working with companies together. We are not the only company that has old batteries and want to solve this problem. So implement this recycling process to other companies. Yes.
Okay. Sounds good. I think at some point I'll be interested to hear your views on how this relates to China, because they have a lot of batteries as well. So, but if you have a quick answer to that, that would be.
I mean, I think, China has solution how to recycle. It's driven by the government, and if the government says now we are at this point that we need to recycling, they will have a solution in 1-2 years, and they will do the recycling. So
that's a different way of governing, and what Rebecca was talking about, governance and who's at the table. I suppose when you have the Chinese state at the table, different set of dynamics play into that. Okay, thanks, Olivier. Rebecca, on to you. What's next? Is there an IRMA plus? Is there IRMA keeps going the way it is? Where are you guys headed?
So we are actually in the process of revising our standard this year. And I think that's really important to point out because so per good practice, any standard really should take a look at itself, right? We were talking about companies looking at themselves. Standards certainly need to look at themselves as well. So per good practice, any standard really should be revised every 3 to 5 years. So our standard that we have been currently assessing against was published in 2018. And so we are now revising this year. And what that means is that we really take a look at the whole standard overall. We look at what have we learned from the audits thus far? What has the feedback been from mining companies as much as it's been from auditors, communities who've been involved in the audits, and actually take that feedback and look and see where do we need to improve. So we are looking at all of the chapters, but we're looking specifically, we're looking at all of the chapters, and we have expert working groups gathered specifically to look at water, waste, FPIC, resettlement, occupational health and safety. Those are just a few of the key chapters that we're looking at right now. And what I mean by expert working groups is, again, what we're doing is bringing around the table that multi-stakeholder perspective. So you've got community members at the table, mining companies at the table, just experts that really have insights into what best practice looks like in each of these areas, coming around the table to look at what are the requirements now, what do we know, what have we learned over the past couple of years of where we should be headed, do changes need to be made to either make the guidance clearer or to actually make the requirements stronger, whatever it might be to actually improve the standard. So I'll just give you one example of that. So like I said, our standard was released in 2018. And then in January 2019, there was the spill at Brumadinho, right? A tailings dam that failed and killed actually several hundred people and impacted the environment and was really catastrophic for the environment, for communities, for the industry. And so what happened there is that over the next 18 months, there was a global industry standard for tailings management that was developed, right, through a intensive process. And so we're actually reviewing that standard, determining where our standard aligns with it or where there might be gaps. And we'll be looking at experts to say, okay, this is where we've been, this is what the global industry standard says, where do we need to change? And also looking at that standard, are there any places where we actually feel IRMA does need to go further, right? Where we actually need to be best practice vis-a-vis the standard, right? So what do we take from that standard? Where do we need to go further? And again, that will be really shaped by this multi-stakeholder process coming in. So I guess what I want to point out with that particular example is, as we look at sort of events and impacts, like we talked about, changes over time, occurrences in the mining sector that then need, that we see there needs to be course correction, or maybe it's developments in new technology, right, that need to be incorporated, or whatever it might be that really continues to push us toward best practice. So we're definitely not staying static, but it really is a dynamic standard that meets the needs of the industry, that keeps up with the times of how we develop as a society and in terms of technology and governance, and really continues to move us forward.
Jesse, I'm assuming, like me, you have to lead a lot of reports and literature in getting your job done, and then sort of also looking at interviews. I noticed two major streams in the responsible sourcing sustainability literature, whether that's academic research or other research. One of it focuses on, here are the issues, here's the problem, here's environmental, social blah. And then on the other hand, this is how we can fix them. And sometimes I feel like they don't talk to each other. Apart from specific standards or toolkits, that general conversation on, here are the issues, here are the solutions, because they seem to be developed by separate institutions, organizations, stakeholders. Do you sort of see these two things merging at some point, or do you feel like that one group of researchers or writers who talk about the issues, and this other group who talks about solutions in terms of compliance and business language and processes, is there an overlap coming through, or do people?
Yeah, no, I think there is an overlap coming through. I think you've seen a split for a number of reasons, and I think there's a bit of a cynical perspective you could take on it. Well, it's easier to highlight a problem than to fix it, but I think the larger reason is that for civil society, highlighting what is wrong, the what's not working, the abuses, is a really critical part to identifying solutions. So having evidence-based research not only makes the recommendations that you're making legitimate, but it provides critical information on, like, what are the salient risks? Like, we know they're environmental, but what are they? Is it water pollution? Is it water access? Is it soil? Is it air? Like, is it, a violation of, agreed environmental standards? Like, what is actually occurring when we say this is an environmental issue? And so having that information helps us identify, okay, this is the risk. Like, for the transition mineral sector, we know for environmental violations, it is overwhelmingly water. It's over 70% water, either water pollution or water access. So we know when we're speaking to companies, when we're speaking to investors, this is the critical thing you need to be looking for. And if we don't have that information, then our recommendations towards them are just going to be vague. Like, have you thought about the environment? So I think that's a really important part of it. But, there is the civil society and the human rights perspective to that too, that it's also really important that affected stakeholders have a voice, and that voice is heard, and that voice is amplified through in different spaces. We know there are power dynamics when we're talking about these kind of issues. And so I think that's also a part of it as well. That being said, I think there is growing work and there's support from donors in this space, and I think from civil society in general, to start looking at this more and being like, okay, when we speak about this, what are we saying is the recommendation? What are we saying we want to see the change be? Like, what is the implementation that we think could remedy this? And I think as that continues to take hold within the civil society space, as we get more support for that, I think, initiatives like IRMA, where you are consistently bringing together diverse stakeholders, where different groups that may not be speaking to each other regularly have an opportunity to speak to each other regularly. That's where we're also going to see this work be able to continue to grow, because it's one, thinking about what what that looks like, but it's also being able to have those relationships and connections. Who can I speak to from, you know, a private sector side that will be able to tell me if what I'm recommending is outrageous or is doable? You know, it's about building those kind of relationships and working together for a solution.
Building relationships is sort of, Matthias, that brings you in very nicely, because the World Resources Forum, part of it has been this multi-stakeholder, building this alignment between companies, governments, corporations, and WRF has been doing this for a long time. And sometimes I get concerned with the way we throw around the word stakeholder and multiple stakeholders. And everybody is invited to the party because it makes sense especially for the mineral sector, which was a very closed club. Opening it up required that you brought everybody to the table, because its problem was that it used to be a closed club. But in terms of building relationships, multiple stakeholders, different kinds of civil societies, different kind of companies, what is your sense of how people are talking to each other on this multiple stakeholder table, whether it's in the recycling sector, whether it's governments, just across the mineral value chain? And I know that's a difficult question, and apparently I've been asking difficult questions all this hour, but I'm going to throw that at you anyways, and saying, is the relationship between these multiple stakeholders now changing?
Yeah, indeed, a difficult question. I do think it's changing. I think it's, yeah, you're right. We're just bringing people together. I mean, we have to measure also us as WF. We convene these debates and these conferences. In the end, it's fine if we talk together and we get known each other better. But sometimes then it takes too much time, and we have to measure our result on the impact. Now what does this lead? And I think in the whole discussion, it's always important we have a consistent mindset set up, which orients itself along the value chain, and that we are not just thinking on one part of the value chain, on the others, and then the different parts of the value chains, that there are actually different stakes in this value chain. So I think a key task in this is to somehow still have a consistent thinking behind how do you connect these different stakeholders at what level of the value chains. I mean, we didn't talk about trade and the impact of financing and all of that, and this is key. When we talk about impacts of mining, it's not just the mining company in the end. There's so many others and that's why we don't get around in bringing all the stakeholders in one place, and also the ones who get impacted on it.
No, definitely, because I think even within our resourcing project experience, getting industry stakeholders to an actual forum and they're like, yeah, no, I don't know if I want to speak, that kind of thing. It's interesting because that process of engagement, sometimes I feel like those who have power actually step away from public forums just because there's a lot of, oh, you're doing wrong, you're doing wrong, you're doing wrong. And I think it's initiatives like Irma who sort of do it slightly differently in bringing those people onto a conversation and say, yes, let's understand what your own limitations are. Because speaking to somebody from a procurement office in a mining company, the guy said, at the end of the day, look, I show up from a 9-to-5 job. I need a compliance sheet. I need to know what I need to do. I don't need a lecture in social sciences to do my job. I need very clear instructions on what I need to check, rather than having these long conversations.